the beginning.
Have you had these before? Is this the first of these
Seminars?
workshops?
We try to make them monthly.
Okay, so you've done them in the past?
Yes.
And what have you? What has been the topics in the past? What have been topics?
We covered a whole bunch of them. So we had grant writing, grant opportunities, general job search workshop, lab management, not yet CV, not yet application letter, teaching statement, research statement.
And they're all on YouTube.
Yeah.
Just so you know, we're going to go on YouTube.
Oh, they're all on YouTube. Oh, wow.
You know, some people can't come today or any other day, so I just record them for.
Oh, okay. Why not?
If anyone wants a donut before we start, dive in.
Yeah, grab yourself a donut.
Yeah. Get yourself sugared up so you can copy. Listen to us. Thank you.
Okay.
To remind me of what was it?
Yeah, well, I just got played by ear, so that's how I'm doing it. So if you could just have a more organized
It's not
approach.
particularly organized, it's just being really
Okay.
Do you want to start?
Okay.
Okay.
So Mike approached me to lead a discussion, and I think this ought to be a discussion because clearly you all have experience with the same subject as Karen and I do. Not as much, we just have more, but that's the only difference really. And how to deal with reviewers' comments on documents that you have prepared and have attempted to either get funded if it was a grant proposal or published if it was the case of a manuscript. And, you know, it's kind of central to the whole process of scientific endeavor, you know, to have this peer review as part of the process. I mean, it makes our profession so different in many ways from many others because we are in a profession where the most important thing is that there's accuracy and credibility in our work, as opposed to in many other professions, it is something else altogether. Secrecy is a big part of what goes on in corporate America and international corporate culture, and we're just the opposite. You know, our work is there for the whole world to see, and before it can be presented to the world, it needs to be, in most cases, although even now this is changing. For most journals, I'll speak mostly about manuscripts and publishing in journals. But in most cases, journals require that the work be evaluated by anonymous reviewers that presumably have no conflict of interest. But I guess we could almost start with that aspect of the process, which is when you submit a paper for publication to any journal these days, the editors almost always encourage and desire that you give them names of people that you think would be competent to review your manuscript, as well as names of people who you think might have conflicts of interest who would be unfair and maybe have a bias, so that you can list up usually 3 people that are those who you want to exclude from the review process, and you can sometimes list up to 6 who you feel should be considered. Editors will then take that information and generally, often anyway, will use one or more of those that you suggest, but they are under no obligation to do so. But this is where it really starts, is if you want a fair review of your paper, think deeply about who might make sense to be a reviewer. And someone who is clearly got a conflict of interest, namely as a former colleague of yours, is inappropriate, and often review editors will figure this one out. So you don't want to be getting names of your students, former students, or former mentors. Right?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Speaking of the exclusion candidates, the candidates that may have a conflict of interest, how mandatory is it for editors to exclude them from the potential pool of reviewers?
I think it depends on the journal, but they normally state that they will abide by your request if you have a reason for it. So it's not enough to list a name with an email address and an institution. You have to give a reason why, generally. So if you have a very good reason, I think it's reasonable. It's my understanding or my experience that they abide by that. If you have a very poor reason or no reason at all, then watch out. That could be exactly the person that they'll go to. So be careful about that. You do not have to list either people who you think, scientists you think are capable or competent to review, and you likewise don't have to list any that you would like to have excluded. But it's your best opportunity to get a fair review from the very beginning. I mean, I don't know if I should say it's the best opportunity, but it is a good opportunity. And editors, just like the rest of us, are very, very busy. They usually have a lab they're running, their own, and many other administrative responsibilities. So they appreciate thoughtful suggestions of people who they might approach to review your paper.
Because they won't know each and every area of each and every paper. They won't be familiar with your peers in that particular area, so it's always a helpful guideline for them.
But is the being in the same field, being competitors, and is that a conflict of it? You know, sometimes the personal opinion of one scientist of the work of another scientist isn't objective. Can it be a conflict of interest, or you have to personal conflict of two people? Can it be a reason to exclude a reviewer? It can.
So if you mean, when you say personal conflict, you don't mean a professional conflict?
No, not
mean some sort of a personal animosity?
Well, not necessarily. You know, people can be good friends, but think of each other's work negatively. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's a professional conflict.
Yes, the professional conflict.
That's where someone clearly has a low opinion of your work for reasons you believe are unjustified.
Yes.
That's exactly what this is about, is excluding people who you feel are biased for whatever reason. They don't understand the approach you're using in your work, or they have a bias against the model system you're using, or often when I indicate reviewers who I feel, or scientists I feel are not going to give a fair review, it's people who have a bias towards the model system I use, based on comments they've made or other indications in their published work or at meetings that I've noticed. So that's one of the criteria I often will use to exclude somebody in terms of my justification for doing so. Simply to say that they work in the same area as you
No.
is
That's
not a grounds to exclude them. In fact, they're the most qualified. So if you say, I want to exclude Joe Schmo because he works in an area that's very closely related to mine and publishes very similar papers as I do, or whatever. That's actually the one the reviewer or the editor would want to review your paper, frankly. That person's thinking along about the same things in his or her work, and is likely to bring a lot of expertise to the review.
Well, that's good. Thanks.
And when you're targeting, even before you get to deciding what reviewers, make sure you've chosen the journal wisely. Because it really has to be a journal that's within, matches the scope of your study, publishes, along the same line. If it's completely off scale, or if, if you feel that the editor has, a favoritism towards something completely different, it may not be the best journal. So make sure you target the right journal. Don't always just go by the impact factor. You want the audience that are interested in your area. Impact factor is good, but that shouldn't be the absolute criteria.
Well, along those lines, yeah, I think impact factor is overrated. A lot of journals have inflated impact factor because the journals have publish reviews. Reviews, not just original scientific articles, and reviews tend to have far higher citation rates. So you have to be aware that some of that is what goes on, and so the impact factor is not is an imprecise measure of the significance of the journal to the particular field. More telling is to people who you respect and whose work is really well regarded, published in that particular journal, far more than the impact factor itself. Now, when you're trying to get a job later, all bets are off. And then committees that screen applications for jobs, particularly at least in academic institutions, I imagine this is the case in other types of institutions and companies and whatnot. But they can just go, right, that's exactly what they do. They go, okay, you've got 12 publications and you're first author on 6. And these six journals have impact factors of 5, 7, 12, and 14, or whatever, and then they just do the multiplication and come up with a number for the quality of your work. It's a sad but true phenomenon that happens. It just is. And if you're a middle author, then of course you get 0.1x credit compared to if you're a first author. There are 10 authors on the paper.
Do you recommend going for a variety of different journals? So, for instance, your work could be particularly relevant to one, but once you've published in that successfully once, should you then go for a different one just so that you don't look like you're becoming really chummy with the editors and so on, and easily getting your work in there?
I don't think that's as important as the other consideration is quality work published in that particular journal. If you are successful publishing in JBC, which is a stock and trade journal in the field of biochemistry, I don't see any reason not to go back to JBC again and again and again and again.
That's the audience that you want to read your paper, and that's the audience you want to target.
As long as it's a highly regarded journal. The journals I would tend to avoid, or at least I am avoiding, are the new ones that have come up in the last 10 years that are strictly on the web. And honestly, the number of journals has gone up exponentially in the past 10 years, at least in the field of biochemistry and molecular biology. I don't know, perhaps yours as well. I get requests continuously to submit papers to new journals or to be an editor of a new journal, and I say no to all of that. Because there's now so many journals, I can't begin to even count how many there are just in my own field. But do I read all of them? Of course not. And do any of my colleagues read all of them? Of course not. The ones that have a reputation and have longevity such as, again, JBC is a good example in the field of biochemistry. It's not an extremely high-impact journal, but it has a 100-year history. Everyone's heard of it. I would avoid journals that no one has heard of. It's okay as a last resort, but don't go there first.
And if you do go to a newer journal, try and go to one that is already on PubMed by the time you
that goes without saying, but
don't go to a new journal.
Even if it's on PubMed, that's not necessarily meaning anything anymore. Everything's on PubMed.
But you want it to be at least pretty searchable.
You can generate your own, you can develop your own journal. I mean, it takes about 10 minutes, and you can have a website, and you can have a journal. You know, journal of the LSU school, or whatever, science of irreproducible results. we can develop a journal right now, and then send out, call for papers. And that's how bad it's gotten. So where is and PubMed will eventually even. It doesn't take much. The bar is very low. PubMed will basically cite almost anything these days. So I even there I don't buy it. I think you want to, and this is not exactly what we were supposed to be talking about, so we're getting off the subject, but and maybe you've had this already in the earlier workshops, but what you really want to do when you're when you're in the position you're in as postdocs, try to get first author papers, you want to develop a story complete enough so it can be published in a journal that's well recognized by people in your field, whether it's the Journal of Immunology, if you're in the field of immunology, or the one I've just been talking about. You don't have to be publishing in Cell Science and Nature or even aiming for that in every paper that you write. It's not necessary. In fact, it can be extremely frustrating because we've been discovered that by doing so, you've wasted a lot of time and effort. In fact, being a little unrealistic, quite unrealistic as to where a paper might end up.
Question. Regardless the impact factor, and if there are two journals there, one journal I have published paper in this journal. This journal is I never published. Do you think it's easier? I publish the journal I have published. I submit my manuscript to the journal that I have published paper there. It will be easier, right?
Not necessarily. It depends on. I had that. I thought, well, they were interested in my original idea. Maybe if I submit another manuscript there, it'll go down. But you may not get the same reviewers. It may be a different editor by then. And it's a different study, so not necessarily. But I think if the audiences are fairly similar, then I don't know that you need to.
Although it is the case that the key person that you have to convince, it's not the reviewers, it's the editor, the handling editor. I have seen countless examples and have heard anecdotal evidence as well. So if the editor's interested in your paper, what the reviewers say, as long as it's within reason of reasonable, that they agree the paper's good and it just needs this, and this to get fixed up, and we'll talk about this in a minute. That's your paper's going to get accepted. If the editor is favorably disposed to your study and has in the past maybe published something that you've submitted, it is definitely a relevant consideration. But it's true, as Karen said, editors change. Most editors are on the editorial board of journals for maybe 2 years, maybe 3. So that person may have left the journal by the time you submit your next paper. But that's information that's available. You go to their editorial board and you see they're still there.
Should we go, let's say now we selected the journal, we sent a paper, and we receive a critique. So what types of reviewers would you, you know, there are different predisposition to your work, right? So you can get different types of critique. Would you generalize on favorable, ignorant, very favorable, very aggressive, and how to deal with those?
I think the first thing to do, apart from obviously reading the review, it's very common to get very mixed reviews. Determine what the tone of the editor's letter is, and have they picked out a couple of key points that they feel necessary is to address. Because if their tone is very negative and they're pretty much all but saying, please don't come back, then, you know, the chances of you getting it accepted are lower. But if their tone is very favorable, even if one reviewer is very negative, then focus on what they think are the priorities first. And, you know, make sure that you're answering every reviewer, every point, and politely and scientifically. You know, write an abusive letter if you want, but then delete it. I mean, a lot of people do that. I've done that. You know, where I got really fed up with someone, and I wrote exactly what I thought, and then I deleted it. And I got it out. But by and large, if you kind of get over your initial response to it, especially if it's some reviewers can get personal, or, you know, kind of a conflicting kind of attitude. You just get beyond that, because sometimes they do have valid points, and you've got to really read your review properly and try and appreciate what's constructive criticism and what will actually benefit your paper. And so, you know, minor points, just do them, just answer them. You know, there's no point in creating an issue out of something that's very minor. But major points, determine what the editor felt were the major things, and then, you know, if each reviewer had one major thing that you think you could answer with experiment. Most of the time now you do need some more experiments. With experiments, determine what would be most beneficial for your paper. You can always argue against doing something, but you have to have a good reason. And, you know, you don't call the reviewer a name for, you know, getting it wrong if they're incorrect. You know, be polite. Maybe, or always remember that if someone has perceived something completely wrongly, it's not because they're an idiot. There's a good chance it's because you didn't write it clearly in the first place. So rewrite it or rethink it to reflect that, and make sure they know that you've made the effort, and you apologize that no, they didn't get it. You didn't get the point across.
Okay, so I would agree with everything Karen says, and what I thought I would do is write out some of the things that have really worked well for me. So I had a paper that was published in Cell a few years ago, and I feel that's the real gauntlet, is to get a paper in Cell Science or Nature. I think in all of our fields is the ultimate objective of our research, at least it is for me.
We don't even drink.
So this is how it happens. So first of all, the paper that was submitted, and obviously this doesn't happen often. This only happened so far once in 2 decades since I've been here, where I had a study that I thought really had a shot at cell science and nature. But there's a 2 or 3 step process here to get something into a really sexy journal. In addition to obviously doing the work and writing up the work in the form of a manuscript. So we're not going to go into that in this forum because we don't have time, but it's this other stuff that can really make a difference. The cover letter and the rebuttal letter. And sometimes several rebuttal letters. It doesn't always work the first time, so you have to keep. Okay, so in the cover letter, what I did, and I often do even for manuscripts to any good journal. I mean, what you want to do is, what I do is I start out in paragraph number 1 with some kind of a generic statement, such as this. Please find, back in the old days it was enclosed and now it's attached, as you submit everything through a website, a manuscript entitled, comma, and then you put the title of your manuscript. And I always put the names of the authors, unless they're just too numerous to mention, but you know, by X, Y, and Z. Comma, that we wish to be considered for publication. In this case, what I did was a little tactic. It was a molecular study, of course, and so I said molecular cell. I didn't shoot right for cell in the first submission. Okay, so that's paragraph 1. Now, paragraph 2 is the key paragraph for any really good journal. Because in paragraph 2, you need to be able to say this. We believe our manuscript is deserving of consideration for publication in this case in Molecular Cell, for in it we provide, and then that's what you need to say in a different way than you say it in the abstract. Just simply regurgitating the abstract is not going to necessarily be productive, and it's not necessarily the worst thing either, because sometimes the editor is so busy that they can even look at your abstract or just read your cover letter. But you want to spin your results such that so that if it's going to be a paradigm shifting observation or something that really is going to be exciting to the field, you go right there and say that. In this case, what I said was, for in it we provide evidence for a new mechanism by which this happens. You know, I can go into details, but I don't think any of you would be interested in exactly what it was. But the point is, you help the editor see the importance of the paper, of the study. And you say it in it, okay, so what's going on these days is in fact these high impact journals, and even JBC, and I think it's going to start, and maybe in some of your own areas, especially journals in your own fields, they're wanting people to now come up with this very sort of thing in addition to an abstract. In JBC it's called capsule, where you have to provide the significance. It's actually background. There are four things I want you now to get. A one-sentence background, a one-sentence findings, one-sentence conclusion, and a one-sentence on significance. So now, at least in the case of JPC, they're asking for all that in addition to an abstract. And they make it very clear this is not to be reiteration of the abstract. It should be completely different, more understandable to a general audience. So, and then, so I said a new mechanism, in this case, by which heterochromatin silences gene expression, and then I gave point by point the key findings. So there it was more of a reiteration. New mechanism, okay, and then I listed the first major point, the second, and the third in this key second paragraph. And then back in the old days, we had to put, or we were encouraged to put names of people who would be appropriate to serve as referees or as editors, because this was addressed to the general editor of Molecular Cell. Okay, then finally, to keep things, keep the tone the way you want it, maintain it for all of your rebuttal letter, all cover letter, and so on. The thing I always do at the end, and I'm going to erase this part now, is I say, what did I say here? Yeah, I mean, it's just very simple. So the last paragraph is simply one sentence. We thank you for your consideration. And look forward to hearing from you. All right, so it may seem silly for me to say this, but some people don't even do that. And I think it's important to maintain a respectful tone in all of your communications with the editor and with the reviewers. Okay, so then that was sent off, and then I got favorable reviews. We got favorable reviews, second journal. I got favorable reviews for this paper. But reviewers were all wanting lots of experiments, and we're not mentioning anything about cell. We still were formally submitting this paper to Molecular Cell. All right, so at this point, what I did was the following. So the rebuttal letter, we had 3 reviewers, all were very favorable, but all had, the usual laundry list of stuff they wanted us to do, but they were, saying, this is exciting, interesting, unexpected findings, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I started out this rebuttal letter by simply saying, start out basically the same way. Please find enclosed, in this case, 3 copies. Back in those days, we had to submit using the old-fashioned method known as snail mail. So these days, you just say, please find attached our revised manuscript. Once again, always giving the title of the manuscript. And I said this, that we are submitting for further consideration in Molecular Cell and then I just brought it up. I said, okay, why not cell? And then I said, see below. All right, so I sort of, now I realize this is not necessarily going to apply in too many cases, but this is just trying to give you an anecdotal experience I had. And I said, furthermore, or I also said this, in it, we have addressed the principal concerns of the three reviewers. And this is a key next phrase. Honestly, it is. Whom we thank for their comments and helpful suggestions. So right off the top, what you always want to do, no matter how unreasonable some of the comments, suggestions, and criticisms might be, you say that no matter what. No matter what. And if you have any interest whatsoever in publishing a paper in Journal X, you simply acknowledge the fact that people have spent time from their busy lives to look over your work. And they do it in our business free of charge. I mean, think about how unusual that is to offer expertise free of charge. I mean, this is one of the very special aspects of scientific endeavor, not just in this country, but throughout the world. You know, that we do this in a collegial way, and sometimes it's hard to see how you can be thanking people for trashing your work, but you got to do it anyway. I mean, if the paper, most papers are rejected, then of course you're not going through this in any case. But if you're given a chance to submit a revision, you really have you have nothing to lose by saying this. All right, then I basically usually say something like this, which is now kind of stock in trade because all journals ask for a point-by-point, and sometimes you know, they now just want you to just give this. But a point-by-point response to the reviewer's comments is provided below. Okay, so then what I did then and what I do now is I segregate my comments and my responses for each of the reviewers. So if you have 3 reviewers, start with reviewer 1, and I summarize the key point that the reviewer is making. Sometimes I'll spin it to be favorable to my to how the paper's been revised. So instead of just verbatim, in these days, of course, you can just copy paste the reviewer's remarks into your rebuttal letter. Often they could be very long-winded remarks that go in circles and are not even clear. And why do that? Why don't you rephrase it? So what I normally do is I rephrase each of the comments I want to respond to, and ignore the ones I don't, by the way. So don't ever feel you have to respond to every comment. So I rephrase, in this case, comment 1, or suggestion number 1, so that it's a favorable, so it comes across favorable in terms of how I'm going to then reply to it. All right. So I put the reviewers, the essence of the reviewer's comment in bold, and then I have my remarks here. We have now examined blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the reviewer 1 wanted us to address a certain concern that this person had about the technique we were using. And so, and then in the response, indicate exactly where in the paper this has been done. So you have to, so when you actually get the the rebuttal, if you will, to the comment that you've already spun in your favor by rephrasing it, not just copy pasting, a long-winded, bunch of text and rhetoric. You want to get it right. You want to distill it down to its essence, and then provide a detailed response as to how you addressed it. Explicitly pointing out what page. Some journals require that in Word you use the format where every line is numbered, 1 to 66 on each page. 66 lines to a page, I think. And so you can even pinpoint it. Line 61 on page 5 is, where you've done this. If you don't do that, and if you're not doing it that way, then say second paragraph on page 5. Hone it in, do the work for them. I've seen often, when I've handled papers for journals, authors will be very lax about where they've put where they've actually made the correction. They say, "Oh, we've done it. We've done it." Well, where? It's a 40-page paper. I'm not going to go through it again and try to figure out where you did it. So do not do that if you wish to get this paper accepted. The thing that will make a reviewer and an editor very, very angry is when you make them do extra work that is totally uncalled for. You want them to find where you made your little change in the text. You don't tell them where it is. As often as not, that's the kiss of death. I don't have time for this person, just reject it. So you do not want to do that. You want to be explicit both in the text and in the figure itself. Panel B of figure 4, lane 4 is now new data, whatever. The more detail here, the better. The less detail there, the better. You do not put the details of their comments because they know what the heck they said and they go back. But you want a very detailed reply here. Detailed, thoughtful, not redundant. I'm not saying just, you got to be, all scientific writing has to be succinct if it's going to be effective. So this has to be also the same way. And so on and so forth. So I went through all 3 reviewers responding to what I felt were the pertinent issues. In this particular case, there weren't too many minor points, but as Karis pointed out, of course, minor points are generally things like a typo on line 6 of page 5 or something like that, or
Cite this paper.
Usually things that are so easy to do that it would behoove you to do it if at all possible, and not to ignore that. Some minor points are just way off base, and if they are and are easily parried by a response, because sometimes reviewers don't understand. They're busy or they're whatever, and they don't quite get what you're trying to do, and they'll give you work to do that's just way off base. So in a very polite way, just point out the reviewer has misunderstood, and in other words, don't ignore that. Whatever you can address, do address. It's just that sometimes it is like, oh, for God's sakes, if you can't figure out a way of addressing it, that's where you can in your rebuttal. Particularly a reviewer has a huge list of stuff they want you to do. It's not. I do it, and I've gotten away with it every time. Just ignore it. Pretend that comment wasn't even there. I mean, unless the reviewer is obviously making that as the major centerpiece of their objection to your paper, but generally, in that case, you're going to get it rejected anyway. But it's usually some reviewers. I've had reviewers who will write just essays that go on page after page. It's like, oh my God, what this person just won't stop. So that's what I'm talking about. Something buried in the middle of this long list of stuff they want you to do, or they think, it's like the whole next grant is what sometimes they want you to put into this paper. They get carried away. Editors realize that. Sometimes reviewers just completely get carried away, and I start talking, or actually asking you to do work that's appropriate for maybe 3 or 4 papers. Not for one paper, but maybe 3 or 4. Editors understand this.
And nowadays, Oh, sorry.
Well, first of all, the phrase, "these experiments are beyond the scope of this study," how acceptable they are.
Yeah, that's a fine way to deal with some comments that are clearly off base and are better for the next study, and that's all you have to say.
Good idea, but it's a good idea, but.
Okay, so in a more recent paper that was published in Genetics, yeah, it has something exactly like that. Okay, so there, again, I summarized the key idea of, in this case, this is reviewer 2, and I said, this is an interesting question, but one that we believe is beyond the scope of this study. Our intent in this manuscript was to provide evidence that we intend to delve into mechanisms underlying this thing that the reviewer is talking about in future work. So that's all you have to do. And it usually works if you have already quite a bit of data in the paper, and it's, you know, and it's honestly something that you sincerely believe is outside the scope of this study, or for whatever reason, it's just not feasible for you to take care of it. And you usually give you 2 months. You have a 2-month kind of clock going to get a revision completed.
There's a minor question. Sometimes the reviewers point to the, you know, some things are clearly not very well explained in the paper, but sometimes you look at the question and you see that there's a picture, and it was there all the time, and they didn't bother to look at the picture, they didn't bother to read the legend, they didn't bother to take, you know, to do a little bit of work.
Got it.
And you don't know, and, you know, honestly, when I first time encountered it, I had problems not writing, sorry, are you blind? Things like, you know, offensive things. How would you deal with that? You know?
How you deal with what?
Well, you know, you don't have to explain. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to change anything. You just have to point out that, you know, it's already there. Look closely.
You can just say, this was in fact included in the original manuscript. It is now, if it's shifted, figure 5 instead of figure 4, you know, or whatever. But just be polite. It's easy. It's very acceptable to say a one-liner like, you missed it, it was actually there, but just be polite about it.
It's a really central point that maybe the reviewer's comment is a representation of what someone reading the paper would think too. So if it's a central tenet of what you're trying to get across, then restate it somewhere else so that the reader gets it too.
And that's what I was saying about if you feel, gosh, the reviewer doesn't get it, then oftentimes it's because you didn't actually write it here in the first place. And you really have to pay attention to those.
You want to try to throw a bone to each reviewer. No matter how incompetent a reviewer might have been, you got to do something to make them feel like they didn't waste their time and you're not humiliating them. So even if the figure was already there, you can say we appreciate the reviewer's point or concern and have modified our presentation so it's now clearer. Even if all you've done is put a comma, where there wasn't a comma the first time around. Right. But that's modifying the presentation to make it clearer. That's all you have to do. Then the reviewer goes, oh, I'm wrong. I was right all along. You know, it's like, you know, face-saving things. You got to kind of remember, people are, you know, have feelings, and they have spent several hours of their time, you know, looking at your paper usually. And if you just, you know, reject everything they say, they are likely to come back to the reviewer, to the editor, with a recommendation to reject your paper. You know, they too will say reject. So if you're rejecting of them, they'll be rejecting of you.
Pay attention to the tone of each comment, because especially when you're deciding whether you have to do extra experiments, if the reviewer said this must be done, then you really want to consider doing it. But if it's like this would be a nice addition type of thing, then, you know, there are grounds to say, well, we've already done this, but, you know, we appreciate the point, we can't do it now, or whatever. But you don't have to do every single experiment they suggest, but they say throw them a bone and try your utmost to do the ones that they seem to really feel strongly about, if it will add to your study. If it's going to go completely off point, then you need to rebut on that.
Again, just say outside the scope of this paper. But yeah, you want to begin every one of your detailed responses with some respectful comment, like we appreciate the point the reviewer is making, like we really, you know, this is very helpful, we thank the reviewer for this comment.
Because you will be on the other side.
Yeah.
You know, how many here have actually reviewed papers?
It's your leader.
Either.
Yeah.
You know, you've been on the other side, so, you know.
I have one more. And I encountered that recently when I was writing a rebuttal, that the comment from the reviewer was so unclear that I had no idea what he or she wanted to know. So I understand it's kind of a stupid question, how do you deal with this, but what if your response doesn't answer the reviewer's question?
Yeah, so, you know, nowadays your rebuttal letter is separate to the comments that go to the reviewers. So if there is a reviewer that you really just can't get or just can't answer, you can address it in a you know, professional manner in your letter, just not make the reviewer seem like an idiot.
So it's a letter to the editor. So I don't write a separate letter to the editor. I haven't needed to do that, but that's an interesting.
But you can
You're
if
right.
necessary. It's
You're
not.
right.
It's rare. Actually, you really need to.
Mm.
But then when it comes to the reviewer, you can say, "I'm not entirely sure what the reviewer means by this. However, I believe they are asking this," and then you know answer that as thoroughly as you can. You know, make it favorable to what.
You can always go back to the editor for clarification. Editors are generally very happy to, particularly if they seem interested in publishing your paper in the first place. It's far better to get a clarification as soon as you get the reviews back, rather than wait 2 months and then and then not do what they're expecting you to do. It's not that it's going to take the review necessarily rejected because of that. That's going to just make more work for you, because you're going to then discover a new set of reviews and more stuff to do. You know, so if it's possible to get this whole thing taken care of in the first 2 months, it's set back and it's accepted and you're done with it. That's your goal, of course. But editors are more than happy to discuss, and often, not often, but occasionally I will have an editor say something like that to me. Get back to me if you think you might want to resubmit this paper. Clearly, the higher impact factor journals, that's what they want you to, sometimes they're wanting to know if you have any intention of trying to make it to a revision, because there's just so much stuff that the reviewers are asking you to do. Of course, in most cases, it's impossible, but if they're going to leave the door open a crack and you think there's some way you can do it, it really is good to touch base with the editor as soon as possible. After you receive the reviews back, and maybe get clarification. This is also true for grants even more. We haven't talked at all about grants, but it depends on the agency. Obviously, every agency is different. But for the National Science Foundation here, communication with the program administrator is critical, and sometimes you can even overturn a rejected grant, at least at NSF, by effective rebuttal of the comments that led the study section to reject your grant, or to give it a priority such that it would not be funded. Now these days, 12 percentile score is still tantamount to rejection because it's not getting funded. So in the arena of funding, it's gotten so amazingly competitive. So you can have, in the case of grants, nothing but favorable comments and still not get your grant funded, as I'm sure Karen has appreciated and has experienced herself. So that's something, I don't know, we really run out of time.
But the rebuttal, not quite as much for the paper, but still for the paper, but very much for the grant, is usually the first thing that a reviewer reads. If they don't like what you've come up with, or you've kind of fought back, they're going to go into reading your grant with a pretty low opinion, and you want them to start off with the highest opinion possible. So you want them to go in with a positive attitude to reread your grant and review a grant. So make sure your rebuttal really, really addresses their comments politely, scientifically, concisely. That you really show them that you appreciate their perspective and you agree that they're very constructive comments.
So after the rebuttal is submitted and reviewers read the comments, what happens next? Can they get with another round of comments?
Yes. Yeah.
Or manuscripts, yes.
I mean, sometimes it will be very minor things.
Right.
Or
it depends on the
we should
journal.
have written.
Depends on the journal. Some journals will not allow a second round of revision, and if it's not basically all with maybe the exception of a couple very minor things, up to snuff, then it's just rejected. So it just really depends on the journal.
So you pretty much write as many rebuttal letters as you receive reviewers, right? What if there's one persistent reviewer that just doesn't want to let it go and insists on something that you believe isn't justified in the study or isn't necessary for the study?
You need to contact the editor.
Okay, this is why I said at the very beginning the editor is so important, because just to finish this little story here, in my rebuttal, the final paragraph was something like summing up all the changes made, and I said, in light of this, we hope that you will now find our paper acceptable for publication in Molecular Cell. Moreover, given the reviewer's enthusiastic comments, we would like to ask whether you think this paper might have enough general appeal to be considered for publication in Cell. Thank you for your further consideration. We look forward to hearing of your decision. And it was our good fortune that the editor was on our side. Dorit Zook, who was editor of both the Molecular Cell and Cell back in those days, this was 10 years ago. And so she actually at this point went back to the three reviewers and said the authors are wanting this to be considered for Cell, because all three reviewers were basically in agreement that it was good enough for Molecular Cell. And then the additional, which took another 3 weeks, amazingly enough, even though there was not one change in the manuscript at all, but they had to go back and look at it over again or whatever. Just 2 of the 3 said, no, don't think so. Definitely Molecular Cell, not Cell because of whatever. Only 1 said, yes, go. This should go into Cell. And here's what she said. Yeah, all right. So in addition to the usual review of the content, we asked the reviewers for their opinion on the suitability of the manuscript for publication in Cell. As you will see, reviewer 1 was, as I said, 1 was enthusiastic, but the other 2 thought you needed to do a lot more work for the manuscript to be suitable for Cell. We have discussed the response of these 3 reviewers and your paper editorial, and we agree that your work does change the way we think about this particular phenomenon, and therefore is in principle appropriate for publication in Cell. And then basically after that it was just do this, do this, do this, which was to the mechanics of how we wrote the thing had to be changed. But we have to have the whole thing in 2 weeks, is what she said at the very end. We got to do it all in 2 weeks, or the deal is off. And so what that tells me, and what is my experience with other, both in grants and in papers, is that it's all the editor, it's all the program administrator who makes the final decision on everything. Reviewers are simply advisory, and their comments and suggestions can be accepted or discarded at will by the editor. The editor might say, you know what? Even though reviewers 2 and 3 are experts, and I have all the highest respect in the world for their judgment or their scientific work, in this case, they're wrong. They're wrong. And I've heard of instances at Cell where all three reviewers enthusiastically support publication, and it's still rejected. Still rejected.
Does not always.
Still rejected. I mean, majority, complete unanimity among the reviewers, they still reject it. Just like grants, you know, you can get tremendous reviews from all 3 reviewers, and grants still not funded. So that tells you right there who really makes the final decision. And so if you have an editor that's favorable to your work and a journal that's a mainstay in your field, it is very smart to go back to that person, to that journal, again and again and again. It really is. It just makes your life so much easier. If you have a really good reason to go to some other journal, of course, do so. But since politics play a role, and we just can't get around the fact that that's the way the world works, if you have discovered someone who's sympathetic and interested in your work, who has power, whether in a study section or at a journal, take advantage of that.
Thank you.